The school didn't close with any drama. There was no announcement that made the news, no community meeting that turned heated, no moment that anyone would later point to as the day things changed. The Eastern District Primary School simply sent a letter to the families of its remaining enrolled students on a Tuesday morning informing them that due to insufficient enrollment the school would not be reopening after the summer break. Alternative placements had been arranged. The letter was polite and administrative and written in the careful language of institutions that have learned to deliver difficult news without sounding like they are delivering difficult news. Leon Marsh read it at his desk and sat very still for a moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder he had been adding to for 4 years. Leon was 44 years old and had spent the last 11 of those years as Zoa City's chief demographer. His job, in its simplest form, was to count people. Where they lived, how many of them, how that number was changing and why. It was not a job that attracted much attention in good times. Population data was the kind of information a city needed the way a body needed a resting heart rate, important to have, easy to ignore when everything felt normal. Leon had not felt normal about Zoa City's numbers for 4 years. It had started with a figure in the annual residency report that was small enough to dismiss as statistical noise. Net population change for the year, the difference between people arriving in the city and people leaving it, had gone negative for the first time in Zoa City's history. Not by much. A few hundred people on a city of nearly 4 million. The kind of number that looked like a rounding error if you didn't know what you were looking at. Leon knew what he was looking at. He had filed a report. The report had been received by the city's planning authority, acknowledged with a brief response noting that single-year variances were within normal range, and shelved. The following year the number went negative again. Larger this time. Leon filed another report. The year after that, larger still. By the 4th year the net outflow had grown to the point where it was no longer a rounding error by any honest measure. Zoa City was losing people. Not in a way that showed up visibly on its streets, not in a way that emptied buildings or closed businesses overnight, but in the slow and specific way that a city loses the people it most needs to keep. Young families with children. Workers in their late 20s and 30s with skills the city's economy depended on. The people who were, in the most practical sense, the next generation of everything. They were leaving. And the ones who might have replaced them were not coming. For reports. For years. For acknowledgments filed away in rooms where the people doing the filing had more immediate problems to manage. Then the third school closed in 18 months and Leon pulled out his folder. The folder contained something Leon had spent the better part of the previous year building quietly alongside his official reports. Not because anyone had asked him to. Because he had understood for some time that data presented as data had a way of remaining data, sitting in a report, feeling abstract, feeling manageable. What he had built instead was a picture. Not a chart, not a graph, not a table of figures. An actual picture of what the outflow numbers meant when you traced them down to the level of specific neighborhoods, specific streets, specific buildings. The Eastern District told the story most clearly. 5 years ago the Eastern District had been one of the city's most actively growing neighborhoods. 8 years from now Zoa City would begin to feel, in ways that were not subtle, what it meant to have spent a decade slowly losing the people who filled its schools and staffed its hospitals and drove its economy and raised the next generation of residents inside its boundaries. Leon did not want to wait 8 years for the city to feel it. He requested a meeting with Director Amara Solis, who ran the city's planning authority, on the same day the school closure letter arrived. He had requested meetings before. He had been given them, listened to politely, and thanked for his thoroughness. He had the folder this time and he had the school closure and he had 3 years of patience that had finally found its limit. Solis was a careful, intelligent woman who had run the planning authority for 6 years and who had, in Leon's experience, the genuine desire to act on good information when it was placed in front of her clearly enough. The problem had never been her willingness. It had been the competition for her attention from problems that were louder and more immediately visible than a demographic trend. Leon sat across from her and did not begin with the data. He began with the school. He told her about the letter. He told her it was the third closure in 18 months. He told her what a school closure actually meant at ground level, which was not an administrative adjustment but a community losing the thing that made it function as a community. The place where children went every day. The place that gave a neighborhood its rhythm. The thing that young families looked for when they decided where to plant themselves in a city. Then he opened the folder. He walked her through the 4 years of outflow data not as statistics but as people. The families who had left the Eastern District and where they had gone. The workers in their 30s who had priced out and not returned. The buildings in 3 different neighborhoods that had vacancy rates quietly climbing behind occupancy numbers that still looked acceptable on a surface reading. He showed her the projection. Not the 8-year horizon where everyone would see it. The 3-year horizon where the people who were paying attention would see it. And the decisions that would need to be made now, not then, if the trajectory was going to change. Solis looked at the folder for a long time. She asked Leon how long he had been building this. He told her 4 years. She looked at him with an expression that contained, in roughly equal measure, appreciation for what he had done and something uncomfortable about the fact that it had taken 4 years and a school closure letter for it to land in a room with enough weight to stick. She told him she needed a week to review everything thoroughly. She told him she would be convening a full planning session with the housing and infrastructure teams within 10 days. Leon thanked her and stood to leave. Solis stopped him at the door and asked one more question. She asked him, in his honest assessment, how far along the problem actually was. Leon told her the honest answer, which was that the problem was not coming. The problem was already here. What was coming, if nothing changed, was the point where the problem became too large to fix with the tools a city had available to it. He left her office and walked back through the planning authority building and out onto the street. The city was moving around him the way it always moved, full and alive and completely unaware that it was doing so with a few 100,000 fewer people than it should have had, and losing more quietly every month. Leon walked to his car and drove back to his office. He had a lot of work to do before that planning session. What Leon didn't fully know yet, and what the planning session would spend most of its first 2 days uncovering, was how deep the roots of the problem actually went. Because the housing system that had priced out a generation had not been built by neglect or indifference. It had been built by some of the most careful, well-intentioned urban planning decisions in Zoa City's history. And that was going to make fixing it significantly harder than finding the problem had been.